I used data to decide which of the 5 Formula 1 rookies is really performing the best this season. For me, the biggest test of an F1 driver's ability is how they're doing against their teammate. They're the only driver in the same car as you, and therefore the only driver that you can directly compare your qualifying and race pace to. So what I'm going to do is delve into the stats for each of the rookies and see just how close they are, or even in some cases how far ahead they are, of their different teammates at the halfway point of their rookie seasons. Although having said that, one of them has reached the end of their rookie season already, but he was still involved, so it seems only right that we start with a look at just how Jack Doohan got on against Pierre Gasly in his short 6-race stint at Alpine. In terms of the qualifying head-to-head, Jack was able to beat Pierre just once in Miami, and that's the only real positive that we can pick out here. Despite that one victory in qualifying, his pace in comparable sessions, meaning I'll only compare Q1 times if one of the teammates drops out in Q1, even if the other makes it through to Q2. Unless, of course, they both make it through to Q2, then I'll compare Q2 times. Same for Q3. You get it. Jack was on average over half a second slower than Pierre, and with the grid so tight this year in the midfield, that basically meant he stood no chance of getting out of Q1 most weekends. Then moving into looking at how his race pace compared to Gasly, he also struggled. Again, I should point out that for all of this data, the race pace delta is based on comparable laps. So, for instance, the crash in Australia that Jack Doohan had, Gasly's pace after Jack was no longer in the race isn't taken into account for these comparisons. And it's also done as a percentage because losing a 10th in Spa is not the same as losing a 10th in Austria due to the massive difference in lap length. I thought about doing that for qualifying as well, but it was more pronounced in the races because of the difference in number of laps that they complete in a race compared to qualifying. All of that said though, the data shows Jack was slower than Pierre more often than not. The race pace of Doohan was almost half a percentage point slower than Gasly, and that led to him finishing behind Pierre by an average of 3.5 positions. Although in defense of Jack, he really didn't get enough time to get into the swing of things, like we've seen with a few of the other rookies in Bearman and Bortoleto, who have really improved a lot in recent races compared to the start of the season. And although I don't really count him as a rookie, for reference, I did do the same calculations for Franco Colapinto, and the Argentine does have better stats than Jack across the board. I know that the hype around Franco Colapinto after his sublime start to his career at Williams hasn't helped him really, because there were big expectations on him performing as soon as he went into that Alpine car, and he certainly hasn't done that. Although, as you can see, the lack of qualifying pace is the real thing holding him back, and has certainly overshadowed the fact that he hasn't been too far off Gasly in terms of race pace. What he really needs is a point-scoring finish to keep the Alpine bosses happy, and just maybe keep that car out of the barriers for a few races now. Moving back to the rookies, it feels harsh to have Kimi this low on the list, but the incredible start that he had to the year has started to turn sour as we've gotten closer and closer to the summer break. It should be said that this is most likely Mercedes' fault, as the team are now fully committed to reverting back to a previous spec of their car post-summer break, and scrapping that whole rear-end suspension that they put on the car for Imola and then took off in Hungary because it just wasn't working, which does also line up exactly with when Kimi started to struggle inside of that car. So hopefully the car will be back in a place where Antonelli feels a lot more comfortable with it when we get to Zandvoort and for the second half of the season. With all those caveats said, his stats compared to Russell are still eye-opening. Actually, one more caveat in that Russell, in my opinion, is the best teammate that we're going to talk about in this video, and therefore Antonelli has an even tougher job beating him, but that is definitely the last caveat. He has only managed to be ahead of Russell once in a main qualifying session, and that was in Monaco, and I'm not sure that really counts because Russell had a mechanical fault and Kimi then put it in the wall anyway, but we know he managed a pole position for the sprint race in Miami, so maybe that balances that out. But overall, he just really isn't competing with Russell very often. The average qualifying gap is just over 0.6 of a second, and we've seen a few qualifyings this year where the entire field spread is less than a second, so this year in particular, that gap is pushing him way down the grid. His race pace is also over a percentage point slower than Russell, which is huge. Although looking at that stat a little closer, I do take it with a pinch of salt, because I think that gap is exaggerated by how Russell often finds himself running around in 4th or 5th, all by himself, barely seeing another car or race, whilst Kimi often gets stuck in those DRS trains behind the Williams and Haas cars. Or more recently, even Sauber cars, as Hulkenberg has well and truly entered the midfield battle in the standings after his first career podium, podium, and although Bortoleto isn't quite there in terms of points scored, he has kept up with Nico in every other aspect. I find it so interesting that the rookies this year have a lot of qualifying pace compared to their much more experienced teammates. As we can see with Bortoleto, as he's ahead of Hulkenberg in the qualifying head-to-head, even though on average he has been a tenth or so off of his teammate. I think that anomaly comes from the fact that I'm comparing the teammates' times in comparable sessions though, and when the Sauber was really bad and they were both dropping out in Q3 towards the beginning of the season, that was one thing, but Bortoleto's average qualifying position is now 14.43, and he's often made it through to Q2 and even Q3 without his teammate making it through with him. So although the average qualifying time is slightly slower on average, qualifying position is much better because when things click with Gabriel, they really click. Although Hulkenberg's experience does still come to the fore when it comes to race pace between these two. We do have to look at this again, taking into account that the Sauber's race pace dramatically changed in round 9 at Spain when the team brought that floor upgrade and shot into the midfield battle out of nowhere. But we are looking at the whole season so far, and Gabriel is just over 0.2% off Nico Hulkenberg, meaning his average finishing position is also about 3 behind Nico Hulkenberg's. The spins and shunts in places like Canada and at Silverstone, which were clearly his fault and cost him when the car was capable of points, have really cost him in terms of those point scoring places. However, I can only see those numbers getting smaller in the second half of the year. After he scored his first points in Austria, which was a brilliant race weekend from him, he's then rolled into scoring points in 3 out of the last 4 races before the August break. Okay, he didn't manage to get a podium like his teammate did, which, as you can imagine, also made the average finishing position stat look a lot better for Nico Hulkenberg than it would have without that podium. But in the second half of the season, I think we're going to see a brilliant stint from Bortoleto and generally for the Sauber team. I did a video at the start of the year ranking the driver pairings, and I put Sauber 7th, but as the season has progressed, I like this driver pairing more and more every weekend. I think that Audi have quietly absolutely smashed their recruitment, and they have a real gem in Bortoleto, who by the way is being mentored by Nico Hulkenberg and Fernando Alonso. And let me dream that there's a future where Bortoleto goes toe-to-toe with Bearman for the championship, because that would be incredible. Also, I'll stop you right there with the comments saying I've only put Bearman above Bortoleto because he's British, because actually I think that these two could be interchanged on this list quite easily. The reason I have put Bearman just above Bortoleto on this list is because the Haas car has been competitive for more of the season so far. So we've seen a bit more of what Bearman really has to offer, and I could certainly change my mind in the second half of the season when it comes to these two. However, with that said, Bearman has been so fast in that Haas car. He is level with Ocon 7-7 in terms of qualifying head-to-head, but similar to Gabriel Bortoleto, has a little bit of inconsistency still when it does come to his qualifying pace, and therefore is slower on average in terms of lap times, but only by just over a tenth. Although the frustration for Bearman has to be that he hasn't turned that clear pace into points more often. He hasn't scored points in the last 10 Grand Prix outside of a couple of points in Belgium during the sprint race, and that's because he always finishes 11th. I did a video on the proposed F1 point system from last year where they discussed adding points down to 12th place, and a slight spoiler if you haven't seen it, but Bearman's points total rockets. So if he can finish just 1 place higher every weekend, he would be getting talked about a lot more, because his race pace is actually slightly better than his teammates on average, which is so impressive considering Ocon is one of the most consistent drivers on the grid. To be even level with Ocon in terms of race pace consistency whilst in your rookie season and learning how the F1 tyres adapt and getting to grips with how the races unfold in F1 just goes to show how high the ceiling is for Bearman once everything all comes together. But I suppose that is what your rookie season is for. Mirroring what I said about Bortoleto, the couple of red flag infringements Bearman has had that hopefully won't happen again, and a few spins and bumps here and there, they're what you get when you have a rookie driver. There's a reason that Ferrari have invested so heavily into the future of Ollie Bearman, and as we've said about many Ferrari drivers in the past, if they can deliver him a competitive car, we could see him develop into one of the best drivers on the grid and finish 2nd and 3rd in the championship. And finally, my rookie of the season so far, and I think most people's rookie of the season so far, Isaac Hadjar. Regular viewers of the live streams will know that I muted this early. I was discussing how impressed I was with Isaac Hadjar's performances before the Miami Grand Prix weekend, only for Kimi to get pole position and make me look stupid for saying that Hadjar was the best rookie of the season so far, but I'm back again to sing his praises. In terms of head-to-head, I have combined the 2 races against Tsunoda and the 12 races against Lawson because it felt silly to separate them, especially as Hadjar has held his own against both. He's made Q3 appearances a regularity in the first half of the year and is 10-4 ahead in terms of the head-to-head because he's often 3/10ths quicker than his teammate. And he's the first rookie to also have better race pace, a higher average finishing position, and more points on the board than his teammate. I mean, the fact that he's often the second fastest Red Bull powered car tells you everything that you need to know about how Lawson and Tsunoda have been getting on so far this year. The one argument I can see against him being the best rookie so far this year, and the thing that does pad these stats a little, is that he has got the easiest teammate of the bunch. Lawson doesn't have anywhere near the experience of Gasly, Ocon, Hülkenberg and Russell, all of which are established drivers who often outperform the car that they've given. There's a reason they've stuck around on the grid for so long, whereas Lawson is in that Colapinto zone of being almost a rookie this year, having never had a full-time seat before, despite having a handful of Grand Prix experience. But the thing I love most about Isaac Hadjar is how he bounced back from adversity. He was by far the least hyped rookie coming into this season. He only nabbed that seat at the very last minute, and members of his own team were questioning if his mentality was at the level required to perform in F1. And then he had that nightmare start in Australia just to compound that. He could have easily crumbled, but instead he's taken all of that and used it to his advantage, and it's almost made every other problem that he's faced so far this season pretty easy for him to just move past, like Japan when his belts were incorrectly positioned during qualifying. Instead of giving up, he scrapes into Q2 and ends up starting P7. In Monaco, which we know is one of the most difficult tracks on the entire calendar, where confidence is absolutely everything, he hit the wall during free practice not once but twice, and again didn't let that get into his head, and on race day he did what the team needed and got his team points. The team have even said that he's almost robotic when he gets inside of the car now, to the extent that they asked him to celebrate more when he does a good job, which is more often than not at the moment. So in hindsight, the weird thing is that crash in Melbourne may have been the best thing that could have happened to him. How would you rate the rookies so far this season though? Let me know your tier list in the comments down below, and thank you so much to the members as always, and to everyone who's been hitting the like button and the subscribe button on the channel recently. We're absolutely flying, and whilst you're here, why not check out this video too, where I delve into what the Drivers' Championship would look like if the points went down to P12, and I'll let you know that a lot of these rookies are massively affected by the change.